Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are at our final episode of the Thailand trip. We're today talking about the Burma Railway. The Burma Railway, also known as the Siam-Burma Railway, Thai-Burma Railway, and similar names, or as the Death Railway, is a 450 kilometer 258-mile railway between Ban Pong, Thailand, and Tham Bu Zayat, Burma. It's now called Myanmar. It was built from 1940 to 1943 by Southeast Asian civilians abducted and forced to work by the Japanese and by captured Allied soldiers to supply troops and weapons in the Burma campaign of World War II. It completed the rail link between Bangkok, Thailand and Rangoon, Burma. The name used by the Imperial Japanese government was Taiman Rensetsudo, which means Thailand-Burma Link Railway. At least 250,000 Southeast Asian civilians were subjected to forced labor to ensure the construction of the Death Railway, and more than 90,000 civilians died building it, as did around 12,000 Allied soldiers. The workers on the Thai side of the railway were Tamils, Malays, and fewer Chinese civilians from Malaya. Most of these civilians were moved to rest camps after October 1943. They remained in these camps after the end of the war as they watched the Allied POWs being evacuated. Survivors were still living in the camps in 1947. They were British subjects who, without access to food or medical care, continued to die of malaria, dysentery, and malnutrition. They had survived the ordeal of the railway only to die in the rest camps. In general, no compensation or reparations have been provided to the Southeast Asian laborers, and some has been provided to the Allied POWs, although the situation is complex. Japan signed a treaty and offered reparations to the Indonesian and Burmese governments and the Allies, excluding the Soviet Union, provided some compensation to POWs, and relinquished further claims from Japan in the Treaty of San Francisco. The 1951 compensation to Allied POWs was seen as lacking. One former POW was given 76 pounds, just 76 pounds. The United Kingdom gave reparations to the 60,000 Allied prisoners of war, the most recent under the Blair government, but not to its colonial subjects. Most of the railway was dismantled shortly after the war. Only the first 130 kilometers, 81 miles of the line in Thailand remained, with trains still running as far north as Nam Tok. History. A railway route between Burma and Thailand, crossing 3 pagodas pass and following the valley of the Kwai River in Thailand, had been surveyed by the British government of Burma as early as 1885. But the proposed course of the line through hilly jungle terrain, divided by many rivers, was considered too difficult to undertake. Thailand was a neutral country at the onset of World War II. On 8th December 1941, Japan invaded Thailand, which quickly surrendered. Thailand was forced to accept an alliance and was used as a staging point for the attack on Singapore. In early 1942, Japanese forces invaded Burma and British forces quickly surrendered. To supply their forces in Burma, the Japanese depended upon the sea, bringing supplies and troops to Burma around the Malay Peninsula and through the state of Malacca and the Andaman Sea. This route was vulnerable to attack by Allied submarines, especially after the Japanese defeat at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. To avoid a hazardous 2,000-mile, 3,200-kilometer sea journey around the Malay Peninsula, a railway from Bangkok to Rangoon seemed a feasible alternative. The Japanese began this project in June 1942. The project aimed to connect Ban Pong in Thailand with Thibusayat in Burma, linking up with existing railways at both places. Its route was through Three Pagodas Pass on the border of Thailand and Burma. 69 miles, or 111 kilometers of the railway were in Burma, and the remaining 189 miles, 304 kilometers, were in Thailand. After preliminary work of airfields and infrastructure, construction of the railway began in Burma and Thailand on 16 September 1942. The projected completion date was December 1943. Much of the construction material, including tracks and sleepers, were brought from dismantled branches of Malay's Federated Malay States Railway Network and East Indies' various rail networks. The railway was completed ahead of schedule. On 17 October 1943, groups of civilians violently transported from Burma were forced to commence working south, meeting up with groups of civilians taken from Thailand who were working in a northerly direction. The two sections of the line met at kilometer 263, about 18 kilometers south of Three Pagodas Pass, at Konkoita, which is nowadays Kankoita, Sangla Buri district, Kanchanaburi province. A holiday was declared for 25th October, which was chosen as the ceremonial opening of the line. The Japanese staff would travel by train C5631. The numbers are in the front of the train. We'll look at that in a minute. From Nong Pladok, Thailand, to Thambusayat, Burma. A copper spike was driven at the meeting point by Commanding General Eguma Ishida, and a memorial plaque was revealed. The Japanese army transported 500,000 tons of freight over the railway during the course of the war. Construction camps housing at least 1,000 workers each were established every 5 to 10 miles, or 8 to 17 kilometers of the route. Workers were moved up and down the railway line as needed. The construction camps consisted of open-sided barracks built of bamboo poles with thatched roofs. The barracks were about 60 miles, or 66 yards long, with sleeping platforms raised above the ground on each side of an earthen floor. 200 people were housed in each barrack, giving each person a 2-foot wide space in which to live and sleep. Camps were usually named after the kilometer where they were located. The worst months of the construction period were known as the Speedo, mid-spring to mid-October 1943. Post-war. Within a year of the Second World War, Britain, while facing bankruptcy, retook Burma, Malaya, Singapore, and the Straits settlements. On 16th January 1946, the British ordered Japanese prisoners of war to remove a 4-kilometer stretch of rail between Niki and Nite and Songkrai. The railway link between Thailand and Burma was to be separated again for protecting British interests in Singapore. After that, the Burma section of the railway was sequentially removed. The rails were gathered in Lam Yin, better known as Mulmine, and the roadbed was returned to the jungle. Here is a monument for the railway. The British government sold the Thai section of the Burma Railway to the Thai government for a total of 50 million baht. This is describing the history of the railway and what happened then. In October 1946, the Thai section of the line was sold to the government of Thailand for 1,250,000 or 50 million baht, equivalent to United States $65,493 in 2023. The money was used to compensate neighboring countries and colonies for material stolen by Japan during the construction of the railway. On 1st February 1947, two people, including Mom Long Kri Chatiwong, the Thai Minister of Transport, were killed on an inspection tour because the bridge near Kanchanaburi had collapsed. After the accident, it was decided to end the line at Nam Tok and reuse the remainder to rehabilitate the line. This here is an abandoned section of the Death Railway in Thambyuzayat, Myanmar, Burma at the time. After the war, the railway was in poor condition and needed reconstruction for use by the Royal Thai Railway System. On 24th June 1949, the portion from Kanchanaburi to Nong Pla Duk Thai, blah blah blah, was finished. On the 1st of April 1952, the next section up to Wangpo was done. The two curved spans of the bridge, which collapsed due to the British air attack, were replaced by angular truss spans provided by Japan as part of their post-war reparations, thus forming the iconic bridge now seen today. Finally, on 1st July 1958, the rail line was completed to Nam Tok, which is Thai for waterfall, referring to the nearby Sai Yok Noi waterfall. The portion in use today is some 130 kilometers or 81 miles long. The line was abandoned beyond Nam Tok Sai Yok Noi, and the street rails were salvaged for use in expanding the Bang Sue Railway Yard, reinforcing the Bangkok Ban Phai Chi Junction double track, rehabilitating the track from Thong Song Junction to Trang, and constructing both the Nong Pla Duk Suphan Buri and Bang Tong Po Kiri Rat Nikhom branch lines. Parts of the abandoned route have been converted into a walking trail. Since the 1990s, various proposals have been made to rebuild the complete railway, but as of 2021, these plans had not been realized, since the upper part of the Kwai Valley is now flooded by the Vajiralongkorn Dam, and the surrounding terrain is mountainous. It would take extensive tunneling to reconnect Thailand with Burma by rail. This is a picture of the Wang Pho Viaduct, built by civilian and POWs on the railway. Laborers. Japanese soldiers, 12,000 of them, including 800 Koreans, were employed on the railway as engineers, guards, and supervisors of the POW and civilian laborers. Although working conditions were far better for the Japanese than the POWs and civilian workers, about 1,000, or 8% of them, died during construction. Many remember Japanese soldiers as being cruel and indifferent to the fate of Allied military prisoners and the Southeast Asian civilians. Many men in the railway workforce bore the brunt of pitiless or uncaring guards. Cruelty could take different forms, from extreme violence and torture to minor acts of physical punishment, humiliation, and neglect. Here is an image of the first locomotive used for goods transport on the Death Railway on display in Thambuyziat, Myanmar. Here you see the number on the train. We'll take a look at the numbers on these trains around us in a while. Trafficked civilians. Over 180,000 Southeast Asian civilians were forcibly conscripted to work on the Death Railway. Limited record keeping on the civilian populations under British occupation has led to incomplete and insufficient recording of the names and families of individuals who were trafficked. Javanese, Malayan Tamils, Burmese, Malayan Chinese, Thai, and other Southeast Asians were trafficked by the Imperial Japanese Army to work on the railway, dying in its construction. During the initial stages of the construction of the railway, Burmese and Thais were employed in their respective countries, but the number of workers recruited was insufficient. In Malaya, plantation families were forced by Japanese officers to send their children to the railway, and young, healthy men were often abducted and trafficked to the railway. This is the start point in Myanmar. Here are Malayan Tamils in the work camps. In early 1943, the Japanese advertised for workers in Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies, promising good wages, short contracts, and housing for families. When that failed to attract sufficient workers, they resorted to more violent methods, rounding up civilians, including children, and imprisoning them, especially in Malaya. Approximately 90,000 Burmese and 75,000 Malayans worked on the railroad. More than 100,000 Malayan Tamils were brought into the project, and around 60,000 perished. Southeast Asian workers were used to build the Kra Isthmus Railway from Chumphon to Kra Buri, and the Sumatra or Palembang Railway from Pekanbaru to Muaro. Those left to maintain the lines after the completion of the Death Railway suffered from appalling living conditions, as well as increasing Allied bombing. Prisoners of war. The movement of captured British soldiers northward from Changi Prison in Singapore and other prison camps in Southeast Asia began in May 1942. On 23 June 1942, 600 British soldiers arrived at Camp Nong Pladok, Thailand, to build a camp to serve as a transit camp for the work camps along the railway. The first prisoners of war, 3,000 Australians, left Changi Prison in Singapore on 14th May 1942 and journeyed by sea to near Thambuyziat in the Burmese language, in English, Tin Shelter. the northern terminus of the railway. They worked on airfields and other infrastructure initially before beginning construction of the railway in October 1942. In Thailand, 3,000 British soldiers left Changi by train in June 1942 to Ban Pong, the southern terminus of the railway. Some captured British soldiers were taken from Singapore and the Dutch East Indies as construction advanced. Atrocities. Here are Asian civilians during the construction. Conditions during construction. The records of the civilian workers have not survived due to the limitations on birth and death records kept during pre- and post-war colonization of the region. One soldier said they found themselves at the bottom of a social system that was harsh, punitive, fanatical, and often deadly. The living and working conditions on the Burma Railway were often described as horrible or horrific, with maltreatment, sickness, and starvation. Life in the POW camps was recorded at great risk by artists such as Jack Bridger Chalker, Philip Meninsky, John Menny, Ashley George Old, and Ronald Searle. Human hair was often used for brushes, plant juices and blood for paint, and toilet paper as the canvas. Some of their works were used as evidence in the trials of Japanese war criminals. Many are now held by the Australian War Memorial, State Library of Victoria, and the Imperial War Museum in London. One of the accounts of the British military perspective was John Coast's Railroad of Death, first published in 1946 and republished in a new edition in 2014. Coast's work is noted for its detail on the brutality of some Japanese and Korean guards, as well as the humanity of others. It also describes the living and working conditions, together with the culture of the Thai towns and countryside that became many POWs' homes after leaving Singapore. Coast also details the camaraderie, pastimes, and humor of the soldiers in the face of adversity. Allied soldiers were often given more freedom than their civilian counterparts to play guitar or accordion, or lead a group sing-along, or request camp comedians to tell some jokes, or put on a skit. After the railway was completed, most of the British soldiers were moved to hospital and relocation camps where they could be available for maintenance crews or sent to Japan. In maintenance camps, entertainment flourished. Theaters of bamboo and atap, palm fronds, were built. Sets, lighting, costumes, and makeup devised. An array of entertainment produced that included music halls, variety shows, cabarets, plays, and musical comedies, even pantomimes. These activities engaged numerous soldiers as actors, singers, musicians, designers, technicians, and female impersonators. This is a picture of Australian and Dutch prisoners of war suffering from beriberi at Tarsau in Thailand in 1943. The construction of the Burma Railway is counted as a war crime committed by Japan in Asia. Death rates and causes. Here is a chart showing the deaths of Allied soldiers working on the Death Railway from 1942 to 1945. For the UK, British India, or Crown Colony, there were 30,131 POWs. Of this, the number of deaths were 6,904, which was a 23% death rate. From Netherlands or the Dutch East Indies, there were 17,990 POWs. Number of deaths was 2,782, or 15% death rate. From Australia, there were 13,004 POWs. The number of deaths was 2,802, making a 22% death rate. For the United States, there were 686 POWs. Number of deaths was 133, for a 19% death rate. So for total of the POWs, there were 61,811 POWs. The number of deaths was 12,621, for a 20% death rate. Death rates and causes. In addition to malnutrition and physical abuse, malaria, cholera, dysentery, and tropical ulcers were common contributing factors in the death of workers on the Burma Railway. The laborers that suffered the highest casualties were Burmese and Indian Tamils from Malaya and Myanmar, as well as many Javanese. A lower death rate among Dutch POWs and internees relative to those from the UK and Australia has been linked to the fact that many personnel and civilians taken prisoner in the Dutch East Indies had been born there, were long-term residents, and or had Eurasian ancestry. They tended to be more resistant to tropical diseases and to be better acclimatized than other Western Allied personnel. The quality of medical care received by different groups of prisoners varied enormously. One factor was that many European and US doctors had little experience with tropical diseases. For example, a group of 400 Dutch prisoners, which included 3 doctors with extensive tropical medicine experience, suffered no deaths at all. Another group, numbering 190 US personnel, to whom Lieutenant Henry Hicking, a Dutch medical officer with experience in the tropics, was assigned, suffered only 9 deaths. Another cohort of 450 US personnel suffered 100 deaths. Weight loss among Allied officers who worked on construction was on average 9 to 14 kilograms, or 20 to 30 pounds, less than of enlisted personnel. Workers in more isolated areas suffered a much higher death rate than did others. War crimes trials. At the end of World War II, At the end of World War II, 111 Japanese military officials were tried for war crimes for the brutality during the construction of the railway. 32 of them were sentenced to death. The most important trial was against the General Staff. Lieutenant General Aguma Ishida, overall commander of the Burma Railway, was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. His subordinates, Colonel Shigeo Nakamura, Colonel Tamie Ishii, and Lieutenant Colonel Shoichi Yanagita were sentenced to death. Major Sotomatsu Chida was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Hiroshi Abe, a first lieutenant who supervised construction of the railway at Songkrai, where 600 British prisoners out of 1,600 died of cholera and other diseases, was sentenced to death, later commuted to life in prison. As a B or C class war criminal, he served 11 years. Features of the railway. Bridge 277, the bridge on the River Kwai, where we are. A key feature of the line is Bridge 277, built over a stretch of the river, then known as part of the Mai Klong River. The greater part of the Thai section of the river's route followed the valley of the Kwai Knoll River. Thai, Kwai, stream, river or tributary. Noi, small. Kwai was frequently mispronounced by the British as Kwai, or buffalo in Thai. This gave rise to the name of River Kwai amongst the British. In 1960, the portion of the Mai Klong which passes under the bridge was renamed the Kwai Yai, or Thai, meaning big tributary. Here is a painting called The Bridge Over the River Kwai by Leo Rawlings, done in 1943, of 4 POWs during the first bridge's construction. On 26 October 1942, British prisoners of war arrived at Tamarkan to construct the bridge. Initially, 1,000 prisoners worked on the bridge, led by Colonel Philip Toucy. In February 1943, 1,000 Dutch prisoners of war were added to Tamarkan. Chinese, Malay, and Tamil civilians also worked on the bridge. The first wooden railroad bridge over the Kwai was finished in February 1943, which was soon accompanied by a more modern ferro-concrete bridge in June 1943, with both bridges running in a north-northeast to south-southwest direction across the river. The steel and concrete bridge consisted of 11 curved truss bridge spans brought by the Japanese from Java in 1942. This is the bridge that still remains today. Bombardments of the bridge, 277. In 1945, a planned U.S. attack was canceled due to bad weather. The two bridges were bombed on 13 February 1945 by RAF aircraft. The forced laborers repaired the bridge, and by April, the wooden bridge was in operation. On 3rd April 1945, a US AAF Liberator attack damaged the wooden railroad bridge. Repair work continued, and both bridges were operational again by the end of May. On 24th June 1945, the RAF destroyed the railroad bridges, putting the railway line out of commission for the rest of the war. Here is the destroyed bridge. The railway did not fully connect with the Burmese railroad network, as no railroad bridges were built that crossed the river between Mulmine and Martaban. Here are images of the Bangkok Mulmine Railway of evil memory by J. A. E. Rutherford, put together in 1946. Hellfire Pass. Hellfire Pass in the Tenasserim Hills was the largest rock cutting on the railway, built in a remote area without approximate construction tools by Chinese, Thai, Malay, and Tamil civilian prisoners and Allied soldiers. Here is the cutting of the Hellfire Pass, which is one of the most difficult and deadly sections to build. Significant bridges. Length, first one, length 322 meters is the Kwai Yai Bridge. And it's an iron bridge across the Kwai River at Ta Ma Kam. Another one is at 400 meters at Wang Fo Viaduct, which is a wooden trestle edging Kwai Noi, 114 River. Another is the three-tiered bridge, which was a wooden trestle, which was at the 155 mark. Another is 90 meters long, which was the Songkure Bridge, which was a wooden trestle across the Songla, which is 294, across the Songla River, which was a wooden trestle. And the next one is at the 56 meters long, which is a wooden trestle across the Mikasa River, which was a wooden trestle. Another was 75 meters across the wooden, which is a wooden trestle bridge, which was across the Zamithi River, which was a steel bridge. Another was 50 meters, and it was the Apalong Bridge across the Apalong River. Here is an image along the Death Railway in 2004. The River Kwai is on the left. This is the tourist train that goes right here along this track. Cemeteries and memorials. In 1946, cemeteries and memorials. In 1946, the remains of most of the Allied military war dead were moved from former camps, burial grounds, and lone graves along the rail line to official war cemeteries. The mass graves of the Southeast Asian civilian dead were exhumed from along the rail line and beside former rest camps for reburial at Wat Thawarn Wadaram, which is a Buddhist temple in Ban Thai, Thailand, in the 1950s. A pagoda was erected over the burial site, and plaques in both Chinese and Tamil text have been added to commemorate the dead. The names of the thousands of civilians buried at the site are unknown. This is the memorial pagoda to the civilian workers, which is next to the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery. Three cemeteries maintained by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, CWGC, are for the Allied military personnel who died on the Burma Railway. Kanchanaburi War Cemetery, over there, in the city of Kanchanaburi, contains the graves of 6,982 Allied military personnel, comprising 3,585 British, 1,896 Dutch, 1,362 Australians, 12 members of the British Indian Army, including British officers, 2 New Zealanders, 2 Danes, and 8 Canadians. A memorial plaque at the Kanchanaburi Cemetery lists 11 other members of the British Indian Army. These Indian officers are buried in nearby Muslim cemeteries. Thambu Zayat War Cemetery at Thambu Zayat, 65 kilometers south of Molmine, Myanmar, in Burma, has the graves of 3,617 soldiers who died on the Burmese portion of the line. 1,651 British, 1,335 Australians, 621 Dutch, 15 members of the British Indian Army, including British officers, 3 New Zealanders, and 1 Canadian. Chung Kai War Cemetery near Kanchanaburi has a further 1,693 Allied war graves. 1,373 British, 314 Dutch, and 6 members of the British Indian Army, including British officers. This is the cenotaph for Southeast Asian civilian and Allied military workers, built by Japanese Army Railroad Corps in February 1944 in Kanchanaburi, Thailand. The remains of United States Armed Forces personnel were repatriated. Of the 668 U.S. personnel forced to work on the railway, 133 died. This included personnel from the USS Houston and the 131st Field Artillery Regiment of the Texas Army National Guard. The Americans were called the Lost Battalion as their fate was unknown to the United States for more than 2 years after their capture. Several museums are dedicated to those who perished building the railway. The largest of these is at Hellfire Pass, north of the current terminus at Nam Tok, a cutting where the greatest number of people died. An Australian memorial is at Hellfire Pass. One museum is in Myanmar side Thambuzayat, and 2 other museums are in Kanchanaburi. The Thailand Burma Railway Center opened in January 2003, and the JEATH War Museum. There is a memorial plaque at the Kwai Bridge itself, and an historic wartime steam locomotive is on display. There are actually 3 here. A preserved section of the line has been rebuilt at the National Memorial Arboretum in England. Here is the cenotaph for the victims, built by Japanese in Thambuzayat in Myanmar. Notable laborers, civilian laborers. There are many. There are also many Allied laborers. This is a train in a museum, unlike these outside. This is C5631, a JNR class C56 used on the Death Railway displays at Yasukuni War Museum in Japan. Cultural impact and legacy. In 2016, RAGE, the youth news and lifestyle platform of The Star in Malaysia, interviewed one of the last known Asian survivors in surviving Thailand's infamous death railway, Arumugam Kandasamy. The film, The Railway Man, based on the book of the same name, gives the insight of a POW into the conditions inflicted upon the workers who built the railway. The 2001 film, To End All Wars, is based on the autobiography of a British Army captain, Ernest Gordon. The construction of the railway was the subject of a fictional award-winning 1957 film, The Bridge on the River Kwai, itself an adaptation of the French language novel, The Bridge Over the River Kwai. It's a novel, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, by Richard Flanagan. Michael Whitehall brought his son, comic Jack Whitehall, there in 2017 for the first season of Jack Whitehall, Travels with My Father. We'll now take a look at some of the sites. This odd train engine is a truck train. This is actually a truck adapted to sit on the rails and be a local transportation vehicle along the train tracks in short distances. It can be lifted off the tracks and have its wheels placed back on again, should that be needed. Here is the truck train. Here is an example of the actual rails and sleepers of the Death Railway itself, and how they were adjusted to fit the tracks, the wheels of the train. At the fall of Singapore, more than 300 locomotives were captured by the Japanese. Many were sent here to Thailand to work on this railway line. Here you can find on this plaque, this train was built by North British Locomotive in 1919 in the company in Glasgow, Scotland. Here we are at the bridge at the River Kwai, the Iron Bridge. This is a copy of the Akon 2 guided munitions bombs. One of them actually struck the bridge in 1945, damaging the section over there where we will now go. This is the first guided munitions in history. At the end was a flare. There were flares where the bombardier in the bomber guided the bomb all the way down. Here we are at roughly the same place where the Akon 2, the first guided munitions bomb in history, struck, cutting the Burma Death Railroad from May onwards. This bridge was repaired and rebuilt in 1946.